Okay, welcome to the Mulch versus No Mulch project. This study is actually off campus. Earlier today, we discussed the climate-ready tree study over at Riverside, and these 4 species are also included in that trial, but we have them replicated in a mulch and no mulch trial that's located in Montclair at the Chino Basin Water Conservation District. So you may wonder why this study is even included in the field day. Well, we thought that it would be of interest to you because the microclimate at the water district is much harsher than the microclimate the plot's located around over at Riverside. And so we thought that this is a true test to see if the mulch is going to have any positive impacts, then this would be the place in which those could be exhibited. So let's look at the 4 species that I talked about a little bit this morning and talk about them as as an element of this mulch or no mulch study. The 4 species that we selected are the Maverick Mesquite, the red push pistache, the Bubba desert willow, and the desert museum Palo Verde. The pictures of them here are off of the site. I wanted to show you what they look like, and they look really good when irrigated at, I'm guessing, at least 50% of their evaporative transpiration. Our study trees were irrigated in at about 80% of ET, and then that was cut way, way back the second 2 seasons. And then at the beginning of the last season, the water was turned off entirely. So the trees are going to look a little different in our study than they do in neighborhoods and in the settings in which these pictures were taken. So the question is, you as master gardeners that are really frontline workers as far as helping both convince those that contact you to look into some species that are rare right now, but we're finding are performing well, and also to kind of level the playing field in the whole conversation of how do we conserve water in landscapes, yet make sure that our landscape trees in particular get enough water so that the important functions that we expect them to fill, and in this case, it's to help reduce the impacts of climate change, can still be realized. So just to remind you of the goals of the larger study at Riverside, we want to make sure that in the future and for our children's children, that our tree plant palette is representative of trees that currently are rare, some native, some non-native, but are heat as well as drought tolerant. They have low maintenance. They can maximize the absorption of carbon dioxide. They're tolerant of a wide range of soil. We want them to be pest and disease resistant. We want to make sure that their growth rate's fairly fast so that they can maximize their impact shade-wise to cool urban heat islands. As far as biodiversity, we talked already this morning about the need to make sure that we properly care for and protect our native populations that are still able to do well enough, if not thrive, under our changing climate, but also to broaden our perspective and not rule out adaptive non-native species. This is a really important concept that it doesn't need to be all one way or the other. In fact, it should be a balance where we're protecting the habitat that we have, that in some cases native plants and only native plants can do, yet we're also looking at bringing into the mix some alternative and adapted non-native species that add to the biodiversity and the number of plants on our palette. So if we have an emerging pest, we won't have 1 or 2 particular species of plants entirely wiped out. Yet we also don't have the adapted non-natives bringing into the full baggage, such as being attractive to exotic pests that would upset the apple cart as far as the ecology of the whole thing. So it is a balance. The 4 species that were selected for the mulch no mulch trial are all native to the Southwest except for 1, which is the red push pistache, and it's native to the Middle East and Asia. I wanted to give a thumbs up to Frankie Sotomayor. Frankie helped us kick off this project over at the Water Conservation District 4 years ago. He's since moved on. He's with City of Chino, but he's a real mover and shaker. And for many, many years, he was kind of the fomenter of this mulch giveaway over there at the Water District, where one Saturday a month, the local residents can come in, bring their trucks, and load up with this wonderful, really high quality mulch. We've taken both physical and chemical tests and analyzed it. It's clean. If we have any difference in growth in the experiment, it's certainly not due to anything in the mulch as far as its quality. The other thing I wanted to mention is that when we were irrigating the trees, we actually were using recycled water there at the district. So we were able to reduce the strain on two important natural resources. We were able to save water, and we were able to recycle a green waste product. The Maverick Mesquite on the left is actually over at the UC Riverside larger plot. The reason I wanted to bring that into the slide set again is because the microclimate there is much kinder. You do have Martin Luther King, but most of the trees are several yards, if not, at least 200 yards away from the street, whereas all of the trees over at the Water District line the street. And so we still have blocks for replication so we can have some statistics, but we have them all in a line, perpendicular line down two streets, whereas these at Riverside are kind of a big boxed replicated plot design, but the climate is much kinder. The microclimate is much kinder there. I think the biggest advantage to the Maverick Mesquite over the other mesquites is it's thornless. Some people are still going to complain about the pods. That's why I have a picture there of them. But there's no perfect tree, which is another point that I think needs to be made. You have to look at what the use and what are the functions that you want any plant to perform, and then realize that there's absolutely no perfect single plant. Another reason to have a diversity of species. The Maverick Mesquite is native to the Southwest. It's heat and cold tolerant as well as drought tolerant. It's deciduous. It grows really quickly, gets as broad as tall, about 35 by 35 feet. It has a nice display of small summer flowers that are yellow. And the more precipitation, whether it's from rainfall or whether it's supplemental irrigation, the longer it'll flower. I put a picture of the trunk in just because I think it's really interesting as well. Here's the pistachio red bush in its glory. This is also off-site. This is an older tree, but sometimes it gets two flushes of this foliage emergence. It's just really, really pretty, especially when kind of intermingled with it. You have green conifers and other deciduous and green leaf species. It just, it's a real eye popper. You don't have to wait till fall. So after a year in both the Riverside plot on the left and the plot in Montclair on the right, you can see that, the leaves have emerged. This is more the heat of the summer, and the plant looks fine, but you don't have that red foliage throughout the year. And it also has inconspicuous flowers. So it's, again, it's not the perfect plant. It doesn't all the time offer all the characteristics that one would want, but that's why you have a diversity. It's a hybrid between two other species. It was developed in Arizona. It's also deciduous. It grows really quickly to about 20 feet tall. Quickly means at least 2 feet of growth a year. And it's fruitless, and the flowers are not its its claim to fame. They're small, inconspicuous. The Bubba Desert Willow, don't know why they named it Bubba. To me, that's not a it's not a real pleasant name, but nonetheless, it's doing great. I try to get beyond my my Bubba kind of questioning. But the trees on the left, you can see how the plot there at Montclair is adjacent to the street. So you do have that re-radiated heat off of the asphalt. All the trees are along two streets, so you have that same microclimate that's much more disadvantaged than the Riverside plots. So the tree in the middle is at Riverside and the tree on the right is at Riverside. You can either prune this and it makes a nice upright, the current sort of vertical tree, or you can leave it as a tree bush, as I would call it, where it's really bushy on the bottom, lower maintenance, but you couldn't put a picnic table under it or really take advantage of the shade underneath it that you could if you pruned it more as a traditional tree. The flowers are absolutely beautiful. They're burgundy and pink. The tree itself, just like the others so far, is heat and cold tolerant as well as drought tolerant. This tree grows really fast. It gets about 30 feet tall. This is native to Texas. So again, this is what we're considering an adapted non-native tree. It's got dark green foliage and not a problem as far as seed pods go. Back to a really pretty tree, the Palo Verde called Desert Museum. It's a three-way cross. Now this is at the Montclair plot and it shows as about 2 months ago in the heat of the summer what it looks like. There's no water. It might get a little bit of rain now and then. I think through the season it's been maybe an inch is all there, but you have to ask yourself, is that enough? Does it look good enough that those that you recommend trees to would be interested in it? Because it's offering all these other attributes. The water's off. It's a great habitat for wildlife and birds. It's a nice specimen tree. This again is the Montclair plots. This tree is native to the Southwest. It's thornless as well. Thornless is good. I love thornless trees. It gets wider than tall and it flowers for a long period of time. Again, very related to how much water it gets. On the left, you can see when it's more in its glory over at Riverside, it's looking really good. On the right, it's doing well enough. That's a different climate. So the water turned off at Montclair, which is depicted on the right, versus the water turned off over at Riverside, are really two different comparisons. And then throw in the heat. So we've got to measure the impacts of mulch under the conditions of Montclair, knowing that the trees might perform entirely different under the conditions in the same climate zone at UC Riverside. So the Saturday after our field day, I went back and because I had to record this portion over, there was a technical problem where after about 4 minutes, the audio started going in and out. So I just re-recorded this and it gave me a chance to put in a couple pictures from 120 degrees with the irrigation off at about 2:30 in the afternoon. Trees were looking good, not even physiological drought, they're looking good. And it gave me a chance, if you'll look at the picture on the right, to show you how we have these trees blocked out. So each block, and we have 4 blocks mulch and 4 blocks unmulched, each with each of the 4 species of trees. You can see that line of demarcation where you have mulch where the Bubba is, and on the other side, the block of the 4 species has no mulch. And you can see the Desert Museum growing great, no mulch. And I'll come back to that little fact in a minute. So a couple weeks ago, I had planned to go to Orlando, Florida to present the early results of the study at the American Society of Horticulture Science meetings. But as most things are these days, it became a virtual conference. So I'll share with you the results that I shared there, or I should say I shared from my living room, and talk about some next steps. If you look at the bar graphs in the third column, you'll see there's blue and orange lines. The blue lines represent the average growth, both at 6 inches on the top graph and 3 feet on the bottom graph of the 4 species in the mulch, no mulch trial under mulch. And the orange bars represent the same species and the same averages without mulch. So if you go to the right side of the graph, you're going to see an anomaly. You're going to see that, wow, is that a mistake or what's going on? No, it's not a mistake. That's a Parkinsonia Desert Museum. And what's going on there, we're not particularly surprised at, but the trees are actually doing better without any mulch. There haven't been any previous publications that have been peer-reviewed that have gotten into that specific proclivity for that plant. But it's interesting because I did find on some search engines some comments about non-organic mulch or no mulch around that tree being preferable to any kind of organic mulch. So we're still delving into why, but as far as your role as a master gardener, I think that it brings up an important point that we, including myself, real typically advocate and recommend mulch around all of our trees and around most of our landscape plantings. But maybe we need to take a second look at that. I know it's on a horticulture, like a public and private landscape scale, it would be really expensive to pinpoint out which trees by species should be mulched and which shouldn't. But I think from a residential landscape perspective, it would be a lot easier. So why does this tree react that way? I get asked that a lot. And right now it's just conjecture, guessing. But a couple points about it are that it's a really drought tolerant, and it's probably the deepest rooter of all of these trees. So the mulch just doesn't make the difference that it does for the other trees. When you think about a deeply rooted tree, you're thinking about roots going into a cooler soil. So the mulch, which helps to moderate the heat and reduce the temperatures in the first few inches of the soil, it just doesn't really matter to this plant. The other thing about it is that its trunk and branches actively photosynthesize as well as its leaves, and the leaves also have sunken guard cells. So that combination, plus when you think about the habit and how this grows, it doesn't have a lot of dense foliage, and so left alone, it's not going to drop a lot of foliage that would be a natural mulch. So something about its physiology probably plays in here too, which is, that could be a whole nother study. So the bottom line is that I'll keep you posted on the results of this study, but it has a lot of implications for master gardeners, starting with the fact that this group of master gardeners pictured here are the reason that the study actually is still ongoing. Because after Frankie Sotomayor left and took another job, then that portion of the study and actually a lot of our data collection ability decreased really significantly. So fortunately, over at their facility, we were training a new class of master gardeners, and I think it was their third week that I actually invited them to get trained in on the project and go out, look at the trees, and get some data collectors. We talked about how we needed to ensure that data were taken consistently, and how we wanted to match up who took the data and who recorded it, so that we didn't have any discrepancies across the course of the study or across the species. And I just have to say how extremely pleased I am with this team. And I only wish that earlier in my years in my advisor job, that I had really taken advantage of the talent that we have in the Master Gardener program as far as scientists as well. So I've learned that, and I'm going to forge forward and on other projects, including the outreach for this one, rely much heavier on you and your Master Gardener abilities to reach the public. So the other thing we're talking about is continuing to have the Trees for Tomorrow projects that would bring together city planners, city managers, landscape architects, nursery personnel, as well as master gardeners to talk about how we can increase the overall tree canopies from the average of 11 or 15% in a lot of our communities up to 20, 23, maybe 25% to help level the playing field as far as inner cities and heat islands, and then wealthier communities with access to parks and also just estates with large landscapes and less climate change impacts. The cake was baked by Maggie O'Neill. You might not realize that she's got a lot of talents, and besides being a great coordinator, cake baking and decorating is sure another one. So I put that in there not just to thank Maggie, but to thank all of you volunteers for all you do in all 3 counties. You're appreciated, and we couldn't reach the public without you, and that's an understatement. I wanted to leave you today with a couple facts to think about, because so much of today I've been talking about individual species, that when you think about it, the larger swath really comes down to the best or not so good maintenance practices of our landscape species as far as the ability to conserve the most water. So we did a long-ranging study a few years ago where we found that just at a commercial level, for public and private landscapers to save the most water, it came down to them implementing what we call best practices. On the lower left picture, it's those cans to measure the distribution uniformity and to help schedule irrigations and turf. It's to irrigate trees and large shrubs separately from turf and ground covers because they prefer to be watered deeper and less often. And other things that are just obvious, but just go awry so often are broken main lines of sprinklers, are crooked sprinklers that need to be straightened, weeds growing around the heads that block the spray pattern. All these things really make more of a difference overall in saving water than simply the plant selection does. With that, I wanted to redraw your attention to a couple of scientific peer-reviewed articles. You can download them using the links on the bottom, and it gives you more of a perspective on really the last 30 years, what UCA and our researchers have done in the area of determining minimum irrigation requirements of landscape plants and the influence that has had on public policy. So please continue to help us replace the don'ts with the do's as you're out there communicating and educating the public. Thank you so very much, and hopefully next time we'll be there in person and we'll be able to discuss more of a dialogue rather than lecture style, what's going on with the different plots. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day. Bye.